Hi. Welcome, everybody. Good to see you.
Hello.
Hi. I'm still just letting people in. All right. So as we're letting people in and people are getting settled, we're just going to talk a little bit about expectations. So I'm Ellie. My pronouns are she, they. I work at Holistic Child and Family. Marie, who's going to be presenting today, is my supervisor and the founder of Holistic Child and Family. And I struggle to multitask, so I'm struggling to click the admit button while I talk. So in this space, we just have some shared community expectations. When we introduce ourselves, we use our pronouns. In this space, we address many intersections of neurodivergence. So this includes sexism, transphobia, diet culture, capitalism, racism, and we are all always in the process of unlearning abusive systems and how these systems intersect and how they interact with our own unique identities. And so we just want to hold that we are all here to learn. We don't want to shame spiral. We don't have to try to virtue signal or show that we know something better than somebody else. The assumption is that we are all here to learn and we're learning together. And I'll let a few more people in, and then we're going to go ahead and get started. So today, Marie is presenting. I'm very excited about this. Marie is the founder of Holistic Child and Family and is amazing. I've had the privilege of working with Marie in a couple of different capacities, and I always learn so much from them. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Marie, and when you're ready for me to pull up slides, just let me know.
So we had somebody who was going to be presenting today who last minute couldn't. And so what we're doing today is that Ellie made some slides for me last minute. I'm going to be presenting on slides that I only glanced at. I'd love it to be like a conversation. Please, if there's anything, just put it in the chat and I'll try to like bring it into the conversation. We're going to be talking about some safety planning and some things that might be a little difficult for people. If suicidality is hard for you, then you're welcome to join us again in about 45 minutes. Otherwise, I'm just really excited about having a discussion with all of you about how to better meet the needs of our humans during what's been a really difficult time in our collective history. So please throw on the slides.
Okay. All right.
Thank you. And Ellie is going to do my slides so that I can better like see your faces if you want to contribute or read your messages in the chat.
Let's see. So working on pulling those up.
While Ellie's pulling that up, I will say that I am a clinical social worker. I'm licensed in Washington and Oregon, and I'm also licensed as a counselor in Washington because the licensure was a lot easier. And I'm also a child mental health specialist and disability mental health specialist, which are Washington state designations.
Let's see. Did I do it? Can you see my screen?
Yes, you did great. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah, you're good. Go ahead. We in Seattle are on the land of the Duwamish people, which is a federally unrecognized tribe of the Salish people. We pay real rent. If you're interested in that, you can learn more information about it from our website. And this is something that Ellie and I are doing together. Ellie doing all of the back end and me being able to talk to you lovely humans. Ellie's
Can you,
magic.
you are too, Marie. Can you share a little bit about why you created Holistic Child and Family? Because I know you and I met working in systems in Seattle and just seeing how crisis support was not adequate for neurodivergent folks.
Yeah, so I will share a little about how Ellie and I met. So Ellie and I met at a crisis intervention organization where we went into homes and hospitals to try to understand and stabilize kids in the community so that they didn't have to be in inpatient hospitalization. Ellie's role was doing the immediate crisis intervention and doing the emergent outreaches. My role was when people, there were many of people in Ellie's role, when they didn't know what to do with a family, then and the kid, especially with big behaviors, then I got sent in to try to figure out what to do. It was really clear to me that the kids that were coming in were neurodivergent and not being recognized, and how difficult it was for me to bring in that information into a construct where everybody was looking at it through a behaviorist lens or just a mental illness lens. So most of the kids that I worked with were sort of on a track to long-term placement in inpatient facilities. And so me jumping in saying, here's another way to view this, and we could keep the kid in the community, was not super well received so late in the game. I've also worked in hospitals and just in other mental health settings where I just got a lot of feedback that my perspective was really welcome. And my perspective came from me being the parent of a kid who was diagnosed autistic at the age of 3. Where people were telling me really, really horrible things about my child and about my parenting and about all of these other elements. Really had a lack of support from mental health providers. This was 14 years ago. So it's really, the landscape has really changed significantly, but I consulted with speech and language pathologists, occupational therapists, psychologists, psychiatrists, just to try to understand more about those different lenses and how they contribute to understanding behavior and expectations, and just really working on a very holistic approach of what's happening internally for the person and recognizing that they're doing the best that they can, engaging in our world. And I thought that that was good information that I wanted to use in my practice. And that was not welcomed in traditional settings where it's very hierarchical. Turns out I recognized later that I was autistic. So I really just did not understand why you wouldn't want to take this information and data from other disciplines and bring them into the context. So then I just started something on the side while I was supporting my family working at hospitals. Until it was big enough that I could move over here full time and then hire other people. So the goal of the practice really is we're constantly learning, trying to understand, and also just really sitting on our own lived experiences. All of us are neurodivergent. And then really just like partnering with our clients to create something that feels very attuned with them. So we're going to talk about some data on suicide and self-harm, assessing for it, and safety planning for it. And this is really going to be through the lens of what we do here. And I welcome any kind of participation on that. Oh, thank you so much, somebody, for putting the real rent Duwamish in the chat. That is so lovely. So again, like talking about suicide is really hard. I think especially for me personally, in doing this work, I'm working with a population that doesn't feel safe calling 911 if they need help, or going to the emergency department, or calling crisis connections, or any of those other elements. because they just haven't been served by those. And so a lot of it feels like it falls on me as an individual rather than me as a part of a system. And I feel that in my body. And as we talk about this, I'm assuming that since you work with this population as well, you will also be feeling this in your body. I really want you to feel like you have the opportunity to get your needs met in this. So I want to just point out, like, all of this data is from 2022, and I'm sure that people are aware that suicidality has increased during the pandemic. But in 2022, the CDC had the numbers of 1 death by suicide every 11 minutes in our country. This is especially true with our population, which is going to be in the next slide. And something from the previous slide was like noticing that like 50% of all suicides are due to firearms. So in this, wanted to highlight not just neurodivergent people and autistic people and the increased rates, but also that we have a lot of crossover with queer and transgender populations. And so being autistic has high rates of suicidality. Being transgender has significantly high rates of suicidality. Recently was doing a presentation with somebody, a psychologist who presented this information around autistic females. So autistic females are 8 times more likely to attempt suicide than allistic females. My colleague, autistic females without an intellectual disability is like the highest group for suicidal ideation. We are a very vulnerable population that is not considered very well when creating systems.
Can I jump in and add something that I was reading about as well, Marie?
Please.
So in some of the studies that I was reading in preparation for this, I was reading about many of the protective factors that we take into account for allistic populations do not apply to autistic people. So for example, we consider education level a protective factor in allistic populations that actually correlates with increased suicide risk in autistic people. And then suicide risk is different for autistic people. So we want to consider, when we're thinking about means and means restriction, cultural norms. So for example, in the US, firearms are a huge safety risk. With suicidality in Canada, that's not. So when we're doing safety plans, we would not be focusing on firearms in the way that we are here in the US. But autistic people are less likely to attempt suicide with firearms. And so when we're talking about safety planning, we want to take into account that the means typically used are going to be different than what we may have heard in other suicide trainings.
Please jump in anytime, Ellie. So we're going to go over how we generally assess for risk, first starting with like our model of empathetic inquiry. So in this model, we're trying to assess all of the internal understanding within a human. So I'm going to give an example, which if you were here last month, you already heard, but I'm going to share it again, which is that I worked with a teenager who was in the emergency department, who was autistic, he felt like he didn't do well on a test, but he didn't know. He immediately thought, I failed that test. Then he thought, I guess my autism impacts me more than I thought it did. And then thought, well, the only other person that I know who's autistic, who's impacted, is living in a facility that seems like a very low quality of life, and I would rather die. And then walked into the chemistry lab and drank chemicals. So me coming in after the doctors had done assessments, I had a very different lens on this one. So the doctors were talking about he doesn't understand all of these things and had more of a paternalistic and infantilizing approach for how to have interventions. His whole family was there, incredibly supportive. And so the main intervention that was notified was, or identified was interventions with the family to protect him, to have more eyes on. From my perspective, all of that made logical sense based upon the knowledge that he had, based upon sort of the thought progression of that, based upon the senses that he was experiencing in his body and the feeling of overwhelm. He was obviously escalated and not able to like really thoroughly problem solve. And just the feelings of like confusion and dread and like all of these elements, like that made logical sense. So in this model, we're noticing all of the like impacting factors for the human, and then helping them identify if it feels confusing or dysregulating for them, the conclusion that they've come to, so that they can reach in with their reality checkers or their supports, so that they are able to then just collect more data. And so this is not about like you came to a false conclusion, or in the CBT framework where it's like that you had a cognitive belief that was like faulty. This is like with the data that you had, you came to a conclusion that makes logical sense. We're not going to pathologize that. Let's just try to figure out how you can collect more data so that you can have a better understanding of your environment. I saw some things flying in the chat. Ellie, do you think that you could monitor that for me and pop in if there's anything that comes up?
Absolutely. Yeah, Zach Sadiq had a great question asking if any of the studies looked at what names are used for autistic people who die from suicide. And I didn't find that. I was wondering about that as well. What I consistently found with the studies I did look at was we need more data. Most of our research on suicidality has been on allistic people.
Okay, so then we also do sort of an assessment of the escalation cycle. This is usually used for safety planning. What I like for this is that it really helps me understand the level of resourcing that people have and the level of interoception to know if we can do a safety plan. So in this model, we have our baseline, the green zone, which is when we are at doing our most regulated best work. Prefrontal cortex is operating, we can problem solve, and we're very resourced. Triggers, which can be anything, and often very benign to allistic people especially, will escalate us into the yellow zone. If we have enough interoception to recognize those very early warning signs, then we can de-escalate and go right back down to green. Otherwise, we cross the sort of point of no return and our prefrontal cortex goes offline. We are really just like, I only focus on safety. And that's when sometimes other people are needed to help with safety, not in an infantilizing way, just in a help me stay safe way. And then we drop into the gray zone because we just can't maintain that level of, you know, adrenaline, cortisol, and all of the like stress hormones that are impacting us. Our body's always trying to go to equilibrium, and often it just kind of overshoots. So we have this gray zone where our brain is not yet back online, and we have to wait till we get to the green. So if I'm working with somebody and I'm using empathetic inquiry to understand how they're getting there, and they have very low awareness of their logic train, and they have very low awareness of like what is happening inside of their body. This escalation cycle is really a physiological event, and this is part of the senses for part of the empathetic inquiry. Then that lets me know that I need to like start thinking about a higher level of care when I'm doing those assessments. Are there any questions about sort of that? I saw some things in the chat.
No questions yet. Zach and I were still messaging back and forth about data. Zach's going to try to find some more data for us.
Oh, thank you so much, Zach. Okay, we can go on to the next one. And also just really focusing on differentials. Oftentimes it's really difficult to understand what the difference is between sort of like an OCD thought or an intrusive thought. We tend to be more prone to deep thoughts and existential crises, is some language that I've read in a variety of studies, which correlates to my lived experience. So in somebody's talking about suicidality, is it an intrusive thought that they don't understand and that they've been fighting, and so it's getting louder and they think maybe that's their true self, which can just like trigger an existential crisis? Or there can just be a lot of thinking about the point of life and going into an existential crisis, and that having those discussions and feeling like calm to have those discussions is imperative. A lot of neurotypical providers that I've worked with in the past just hear anything related to those, and before they ask any questions, they send the person to the emergency department, which is traumatizing. It is traumatizing to go to the emergency department, and it is traumatizing to be admitted. And that is not something that people who don't have the lived experience of going to the hospital minimize often of what it feels like to go into that new environment and feel afraid and also not be able to leave. Additionally, I always look at the at self-harm, trying to figure out what is the purpose of the self-harm. So if what you're doing related to self-harm is that you are doing like suicide rehearsal, you want to see how deep you can cut into your skin and the pressure it takes because you want to die, that is incredibly different than the non-suicidal self-harm, which I then ask additional questions to understand, is this person sensory seeking? Or is this a coping strategy? A lot of times, especially with neurotypical providers, there's an understanding that it can be a coping strategy, but there's less understanding that it can be sensory seeking. So a lot of clients hit themselves in the head until they have a bloody nose or they have abrasions. Or I worked with somebody that was electrocuting himself. These to me are not warning signs of anything, after a discussion and then or some data collection if they're non-speaking. To me, that's just like, oh my gosh, we got to help with some like proprioceptive information that's not harming your body. We've got to figure out like what the triggers are, which are likely environmental sensory triggers that are causing this level of distress that you're trying to regulate your nervous system. You can go to the next one.
Marie, can I ask a question?
Yes.
Sorry, I don't want to type it. I want to just ask it. So like I guess, is it more of a personal question for you, or even Ellie, if you want to like jump in, it's just like, do you ever have a part of you that comes up that believes in the clinical disability paradigm, that's questioning your own judgment when you know that a person is like reasonable in their self-harm or SI ideation, right? Or it's sensory. Like, do you ever feel like you are fighting what you think like the neuronormative is?
I will say that I have a huge amount of anxiety because then I have to go and I have to engage this person or in this person's medical team and construct. And when I'm trying to do safety planning with family or with school or with all these other things, we're looking at such different lenses that I feel like I have to do so much psychoeducation to back me up and give them additional like resources to read that are not from me. I think that like less like within myself of like me viewing them that way, and more like, God, I hope I'm right. and that nothing bad happens, because it's not just my understanding of this person. I'm also trying to do an assessment of the system and how able they are to present, like to protect them in with this sort of model. I feel very anxious about it all the time. I also feel very anxious about it if I need to send somebody to the emergency department. I do a lot of communication with them.
And I figured you would say that, but it just feels good to hear that someone who's seasoned like you, that's because I have an incredible amount of anxiety when, I make these decisions with my clients and just do not want to call 911. And it's just nice to hear that like we're all kind of in this together, wanting to give, that neurodiversity affirming care to our clients. And that might not look what we are trained to do, at least from that neuronormative perspective.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I will say that like it makes me feel so much more responsible than I would like, because my clients have very good reasons to not want to call 911, not want to go to the emergency department, and not feel safe calling crisis lines, which will call 911 to their home. The first question that they ask is, what address are you at and what's your name, before they even start talking to you about your problem. It's a lot. It weighs on me a lot. That's really why I wanted to like grow an organization where I could have a lot of people so I didn't feel so alone in this, and why I wanted to have a consult group so that we could talk about this, because it just feels so heavy to me. All right, let's go on to safety planning. So this is the third page to a handout that some of the staff made, which I love. So huge shout out to CJ and Katya. But the handout, which we'll send out, has like the first page is just psychoeducation about the escalation cycle. The second page is helping you chart your own. And then the third one is like, what do you want to do and what do you want other people to help you with? And with this is really, to me, it's more of a systems intervention than it is an individual intervention. Like oftentimes I think that it's super helpful for the second page of like me having more interoception for what are my triggers and what do I want to do about them, and what do I want other people to do, because it's just like hypothesis testing. I'm guessing when I'm regulated what I'm going to want when I'm really escalated, and it's likely to be faulty, and then just needing to fine tune it. But really, like with this, like this is something that like I love like family members or significant others to really look at, because oftentimes the interventions are just counterproductive or actually super harmful. So an example that I give is like if you have, let's say that you have a child who when they're in their red zone, they have a fight response. They are just like punching walls and they're screaming and kicking. A lot of people will come over and say, what do you need? How can I help? Tell me what's happening, what's going on, what happened. That is not a time that any child, especially a neurodivergent child, can access like higher reasoning and communication. And then when the kid sort of like slumps on the ground because they're exhausted, and oftentimes when we're in our gray zone, we're actually kind of sad. It's a common response. Then oftentimes people will sit down with that child and say, oh, what was happening? That was a lot. Also, we need to like figure out, we want you to understand how your behaviors were inappropriate before you re-enter the classroom. Like all of these things that kid is just not capable of doing. And so really a lot of this is, how can I communicate to everybody in this person's environment? Like this is actually what's super helpful. And just like calming them down, because I'll say for myself, and this is a pretty common experience, that I have hyper empathy, and if I have people around me that are anxious, then it's going to escalate me further. Additionally, if somebody has incongruent affect, so if they're really anxious but they're smiling at me, like that's going to be even more triggering. I've worked with a ton of kids with big behaviors or unexpected behaviors, like especially in schools, and I say to the teachers, like, okay, well, can you just walk me through like your understanding of what happened? And then at some point I say, well, how are you feeling? And they say, well, I was really frustrated, but I wasn't letting it show. I had the calm voice. I had my hands just so. I was doing all these things. And I was like, oh, and then did you get bit? Because that's like that's like invitation to get bit. And all the times it was true. Like, it's just too dysregulating to have that incongruence. It just doesn't make any sense. And so people knowing what to do and being able to stay calm is a super helpful intervention. Okay, so here are, and this is a handout that we'll send out, which is just like different types of sensory integration and things that I use in safety planning, especially in just sort of helping people chart their escalation cycles. These are types of heavy work. We've talked about this before, but the 8 senses, the 5 that you learn about in school, and then proprioceptive, which is heavy work, and also just sort of like confined spaces. It's just like your sense of the world. I love a hidey hole and a weighted blanket. But also just like exercising muscles can be really regulating. And this can be, as referenced earlier, one of the things that people, when they misinterpret head banging or biting themselves or other things like that, like these are some great things to try that can be put into the safety plan. With all non-suicidal self-harm, all the research indicates that like removing what is working creates higher levels of suicidal ideation. We're just looking at replacements. I never want to remove something that somebody's identified as like the only thing that works. So here's just some ideas. And again, like this is all in a handout with also just some information about vestibular. And vestibular is there's a thing in your inner ear that tells you when you're in motion. And so some people get really regulated with vestibular information. So rocking, swinging, spinning, just sort of like jumping up and down can be great because like on a trampoline, there's that sort of the heavy work of using your muscles plus that movement of the vestibular. But really thinking of a safety plan as not just what we learned in sort of neurotypical spaces, but also just like what's happening internally for this human. So means restriction is a huge one. And means restriction often, at least my perception of it, is often around sort of a more pejorative, infantilizing approach of that this person can't be trusted with sharps. The way that I use means restriction is that it is with the client still being the leader of the safety plan, and that the means restriction is not because they can't be trusted. It's because we've charted it all out and we know that when they are in the red zone, that they have trouble being safe, and that we need to help them just wait it out until they can like go over that peak. So oftentimes my clients do their own means restriction. They have like a lockbox that they fully have the keys to, but the amount of time that they have to go and like get the key to go to the lockbox is enough time for them to de-escalate a little bit and move through that period of time. This whole sort of way of being is really, for me, about understanding the person's experience in the world and helping them build skills and understanding of themselves so that they don't feel so powerless. A lot of the interventions that that I've been taught in more traditional neurotypical ways are really taking away that person's power because they can't be trusted, rather than empowering them to make their own decisions. And these are apps that I highly recommend. Um, so I'm sure that I've talked to pretty much everybody about the Finch app. That's the one that's on the left. What I like about the Finch app, it's my understanding is it was created for adults, but it is so cute that everybody of all ages uses it. You hatch a little bird, and you can put in your goals. It does mood tracking. It has like what they call like quizzes, which is depression quiz and anxiety quizzes, but they're really the GAD-7 and PHQ-9, so people can monitor their own sort of like state. It has it has like what they call like first aid, which has some like distress breathing exercises and some grounding exercises that just really, it's just such a helpful tool. I had so many different apps that I would have people download, and this really just like took away all of that. I feel like it does such a great job of all of them in one. It is mostly free. The paid version, I think, is a little bit, it has more options, and has more options of not just soundscapes and breathing exercises, but also in data collection of mood tracking. And something that I really like about it for safety planning is that through this, you can name your little creature anything that you want. So when you can share with other people, you can be neighbors in each other's trees in little nests. And so I have just trees of clients who will send me little messages of basically the bird comes over and like gives my bird a hug, which is just a helpful way for them to stay connected. And it's been like very helpful in both them feeling less alone in the world between our sessions, and then also just encouraging them to continue to use it for their own self-care. The Calm Harm app is super adorable and really great about just like helping people ride the wave. So helping people like when they understand their escalation cycle, and we just need to move through the highest part of that peak. And we just need to urge surf. It does a great job with that. It gives you timers and a variety of interventions that you can choose from. And the third one is the Mental Health Crisis Plan app. It's by SAMHSA. I highly recommend that everybody who has really any significant mental illness concerns, or just concerns about interfacing with medical environments related to mental health, creates a mental health advance directive. There are print options that you can download, but this is an app version where the person can just put it into the app, and then you can see on the left of the frame, it's like a little QR code, or you can just send it. So when I have people who I think we might be going to the emergency department or interfacing in some capacity, we work on the mental health advance directive together. And be incredibly thoughtful. So who do you want contacted? What medications are you okay having used? What hospitals do you prefer? It can be incredibly specific. And then I like all of the people in that person's team to have a copy, but also I want them to have a copy that they can show to like first responders if they come. If there's a hospital that's preferred, I get the hospital to have this in their chart so that they know what to do if the person arrives.
So in the chat, we have had validation that we hold a lot in our bodies as clinicians working with suicidal folks. A lot of anxiety. Gabriella mentioned that she has been told by supervisors before that she just cared too much, which was very much a message that I got working in an ER setting. But we do hold this a lot in our bodies. And then Samantha was asking if you have resources for financial supports for people who need these kinds of sensory supports but don't have the means. So like weighted blankets, swings, hammocks. And Marie, I remember when I worked with you previously with some families, you had some really great ideas of how to make sensory supports at home. Like I remember you using couch cushions with one family. Do you have some ideas about that?
Yeah, so the heavy work sheet with the ideas that we can send out has very like no cost options. I will say if somebody has DDA benefits, DDA will pay for all of that, all of the supplies that you need. You just need an occupational therapist to write a prescription. So the kid who I worked with, who I was brought in because he kept electrocuting himself, nobody could figure out why. They disabled so many outlets in their house, and he just kept getting into them because you have to have some electricity to function. He had mentioned to me that he liked the way his bones vibrated, and so then we took that to his occupational therapist to try to replicate the sensory information that he was receiving from electricity. And then they wrote a prescription that DDA paid for, and getting him those sensory tools. And I will say that I'm on a lot of Facebook groups where people are willing to share resources. But I don't know of anybody that's just paying for those right now.
Zach Sadiq put in the chat that Ben's fund for people who are under 18 can be helpful. I'm assuming that's King County only. Is that right, Zach?
I think they're Washington State. Let me look them up.
Okay, and we have some more information
you're
that
right.
Ben's fund goes up to 23.
I think you're right, Zach. I think it's the whole state.
That's amazing. So this is one of the things that that I just want stressed, not because I think that you are doing anything, because I trust that everybody here is very affirming, but these are memes. I see memes pop up all the time on my feed that reference this, is that there is some sort of magical thing that somebody's going to say that's going to make me like force them into a hospital. So my part of my safety planning is really just helping them understand what a voluntary admission looks like, what an involuntary admission looks like, how difficult it is to have that, how much agency they have based upon their age and the location that they live. And really demystifying it. It's amazing how many people have been holding in really just like existential crisis thoughts or intrusive thoughts because they thought that if they shared any of that with me, then I was going to force them to go to the hospital, which just incredibly gets in the way of how they feel about themselves as a human, and then just like therapeutic work in general. So similarly, just being an ally, being a partner with them, helping them feel agency in this. In Washington State, when children turn 13, they have agency over their own mental health decisions. But even younger than that, I really center the person, that they're the boss. This is for them. That if there is an intervention that we need to have, that it is really like that they have buy-in and that they understand it's something that they desire. So so setting the frame, like the systems are confusing. I think the systems are confusing. They change all the time. Practices and policies at governmental levels, hospitals are always evolving. And the idea that somebody who's a consumer of those, who's never interacted fully, is going to know how to do it is just setting everybody up for failure. Assuming competence, that they can, they know how to, they know themselves, or that they're the expert of their own experience. And and really like being aligned with them. And then the like being for your client, which is I've been yelled at by people in the emergency department. I had one where he told me that I was being manipulated and that the person just needed to go to a DBT group. And I said, would you please let me know which DBT group is taking autistic people, and I will put them on that wait list. And he didn't have any. It's really hard, and like knowing how to like use your resources, use your community to sort of go in there and really be for your client is a really brutal exercise. And I hope that like just building community and knowing that you're not alone in this can be really resourceful in this. I also, when I am sending anybody to the emergency department, I first try to safety plan them to be able to be safe to ride in a car, either with somebody that they can drive themselves. If we plan for it, I trust them, or somebody drive them, or a Lyft well before I call 911. I only really call 911 if it is an ingestion or an attempt that's happened in front of me, or or outside of my control, and I just have to. Then I call ahead to the social worker in the emergency department that they're going to go to, and I give them a real quick case summary with our safety plan and how we've tried all of the things that have led us to that. Well, I want them to know that I understand that there's a full range of options for safety planning, outpatient being on one end, doing what we're doing, and then inpatient hospitalization on the other, and that I've already considered all of those, because that is such a burden for the clients when they go into the hospital to try to advocate for themselves. And so many of my clients have been masking for so long that when they go in and they're overwhelmed by the system that they're masking, and then the person does not take them seriously in their concerns. So I really want to set the stage before they go anywhere or interact with any other agency or community hospital. So now just wanted to check in about questions or talking to each other about this, possibly giving support. I'm definitely an open book if anybody has any questions related to clinical or personal experience within this construct. And I just want you to know that I think that you're all amazing and that this is a really significant burden that we as providers are holding right now.
This is Zach. I think one question I have is, which hospitals are like the least harmful for, autistic or neurodivergent folks experiencing suicidal ideation? Most of the folks I work with like don't want to go there if they're experiencing suicidal thoughts.
I will say that in the Seattle area, I've only heard really great things about Swedish Ballard, that they've really enjoyed both the emergency department experience and the inpatient experience, where they actually did the sorts of things that other places say that they're going to do, like yoga. And I heard that the food's even good. I've also heard good things about University of Washington's emergency department, but I haven't gotten a lot of reports based upon the inpatient stays, because honestly, most of the people just go to Swedish Ballard.
Okay, good to know. The one person I know who went to UW's had a really bad experience. They tried diagnosing him with schizophrenia and giving him antipsychotics to promote, quote, eye contact and socialization. So
Okay.
that was 5 years ago, so it's possible it's changed since then, but yeah, that was a lot.
Yeah, I also feel like it's kind of on them to prove to us that it's a safe place to go to, so that's good data.
I wanted to say thank you so much. This is the conversation that I want to be having all the time. And so much of the time, people just get sent to the hospital and it's rough. So I messaged Ellie. I don't know. Yeah.
Yes.
Ellie.
So I would really appreciate if you would bring that case for case consultation. I think we have a couple more questions and then I'm going to pause recording so we can do the case consultation.
I got you. All right. Never mind.
Awesome. Thank you. I see Emily has their hand up.
Hi, thank you for the presentation. I just would love to hear if people are interested and able to share when in their relationship with their client are they building these safety plans. I feel like it's definitely should be individualized, but I don't know. I've just had some experience where it's like, oh, everything's good. And then you should have had a plan, but I'm also just meeting you. So I want to support your everything's good. So I don't know if people have found it better to do like after intake, before services, you know, and I just think it's challenging because it can be another thing to do, which is maybe the client's top priority. So I just wanted to see how people, when they approach it and how they kind of maybe even just acknowledge, maybe this isn't your priority, but I just, it also helps me get to know your whole team and da, 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 da.
That's a great question. I will say that my interest in an intake is to better understand the human that's with me and really align so I understand their goals. Much less than like a traditional intake, a lot of those questions that I want answered, I have them fill out before they come to those sessions so that I can really focus on that connection. And I start talking about an escalation cycle incredibly early, either in the intake or the next session. And I do that because I want to know what it looks like when they're experiencing some distress, especially if they've been masking their whole life. I want to know how I can be helpful. And I want to know how to sort of like keep them in the zone of regulation when we're talking about something that's incredibly difficult. I will also ask about their team just so that I understand their supports, but it's really like the emphasis that I put on is like, I'm a part of that team. I want to know what kind of community resources you have. And then opening that door and destigmatizing that like leads me into a natural sort of space where we can do like the safety planning, but it's really just, I do that escalation cycle. And then the safety planning is like in the, like what I can do is like specific people to reach out to and how to know when we need extra help. And then introducing the advanced directive. Does that feel good to you, or did you? Okay.
I don't know how to raise my hand. So how do I, and anytime there's ready, I have a question. I don't know how to do it.
Okay, let's have Corey go and then you can go, Britt.
Okay.
Thanks so much. And Marie, I don't mean to put you on the spot at all here because I have a question with something you may or may not have familiarity with. And I want to say I love hearing how you conceptualize this and the resources that you've created and along with your team to help your clients conceptualize this so they have a better understanding of their internal experience and how to feel more regulated within that experience. I have historically used, I don't know if you're familiar with the CAMS approach to, okay. And so as I was listening to, I went and grabbed my CAMS book and I was looking at it and looking at how that works with some of what you're proposing. And it seems like they might marry well together in terms of that, like not just the psychoeducation piece of helping the person understand their own internal experience, and how to support themselves or ask for support or be supported in the context of that, but also identifying like those drivers of suicidality or of kind of the dysregulation that results in feeling like there's an action to be taken. And I wasn't sure if you could speak to that at all, or whether it's today or at another future time. I would just be really interested to hear your thoughts about that tool in combination with how you approach this.
Yeah, I think that to really speak about like the tool and the connections with that, I would want to have a little bit more time so that I could sit down and be really thorough with it. Yeah, I think that to be honest, the tools like that I've utilized have generally been so that I can interface better with medical systems. So so trying to there's a lot of people that that have different models in the Seattle area of what they like to utilize. And then I try to understand what their model is so that I can weave in my own stuff into that. But I think that what you're bringing up is really great. I think that that could be an overarching element that could have just adaptations that could be really useful and easy for people to have that disseminated information because it's so thorough. So thank you.
Absolutely. Although it seems like their model of sitting down next to the client at that first session and being right cozied up with them to fill it out is not a great fit for.
Yeah, I think that that's why I really want to like go over it more fully. I think that that's a great thing that there could be like significant adaptations to that could turn that model into something that could be really useful for our population.
Thank you.
So I can lower my hand. I guess I feel like this is so fun. We can ask you anything, Marie. This is so great. So one of the things that I noticed in myself that, again, what makes me really anxious is, and I think what I'm noticing here is that a lot of you guys work with a lot of kids, and this question kind of refers more towards the adult autistic experience. But I'll have clients who are just, there's just this level of significant hopelessness at times when it comes to the fact that our world is just not built for an autistic person. And like, it's just, and this is why we do these groups together and why we support each other, because it's a lot to carry. But like, I guess, what is your role and your approach? What's your, what are things that you say to the clients who are like, over and over again, I can't be successful, I can't survive in this world, and so the only thing I can do is.
Yeah, I will say that like I'm a social worker and I come at it from a pretty significant like social work lens, which is acknowledgement. And I really try to spend a lot of time and energy trying to figure out with them, like, you know, like I say, like, don't internalize your external oppression. Like, you're being actively oppressed in this world. And that's not a failing on you. And I have a lot of adult clients who say that, like, the world does not want me to exist, you know, Black, trans, autistic, like, it's too hard, it feels like too much. And I just sit in that pain with them and talk about like what would it take for you to be able to exist in this? Like, what does your community look like? How can we create a bubble? And really like not shying away from that pain. I don't know if that's helpful in any capacity, but it's been helpful in us creating safety plans of like connecting to people that are safe and really rethinking about what does it mean to be successful, moving out of sort of an ableist, capitalistic structure and identifying ways that people can have meaning in other environments. And then oftentimes talking about people in their life that are not like productive, that they get a lot of meaning or love from, and doing some exercises in like taking it away from the individual and moving it into like, if somebody's non-speaking and they're in this family environment and they're never going to have a job, like, does their life have value? And how do we determine that? And how can we like change the gravitational pull of expectations, even though we're all existing in a deficit model of like when you go with a disability into any environment, the first thing is how can you look like a neurotypical person?
That was incredibly helpful because I'm also a social worker, and you just validated me, and that's what I do. And so it was extremely helpful.
Good.
And Marie, we have a question from the chat about self-diagnosis versus formal diagnosis when accessing resources or higher level of care. So like going to the ER and somebody is self-diagnosed autistic or has not been able to access diagnosis.
Is the question related to having those people take them seriously? Like, how do I pitch that so that they're not a-holes?
Yeah, I mean, definitely to that extent, or yes, because I mean, in my experience, people don't take me seriously. And so I couldn't imagine I can imagine being in that type of situation where, you know, in that mindset of self-harm and suicidality, you know, I feel like even less safe, I think, accessing some of those services and resources because I don't have that formal diagnosis, and people don't trust my knowledge base and expertise about myself and even this information.
Okay, so I'm self-diagnosed. I've got 2 kids. One's officially diagnosed, and the other one I can't get diagnosed because, I mean, systemic barriers, they're AFAB with a high IQ. The last person I finally got them in front of said, like, what were your grades, you know, last year? And my kid was like straight A's. And they're like, well, then you don't have anything. Yeah, my kid got straight A's, but my kid can't be in intellectually advanced classes that they should be in because they get too overwhelmed. So even though they tested into high school class or into college classes when they were 11, they're in typical classes so that they can just manage their own anxiety. And when I go to meetings for my children, well, especially historically now, I'm just much more upfront about everything. But in the past, I was treated really, really poorly and not an expert of my child's experience, not an expert of my experience. And then the same day, I would go to a meeting as a professional and be treated like everything I said was magic. I guess like first is just acknowledging like those huge systemic barriers and the huge injustice that we are experiencing. And then I try to use what I have in my community. And so part of that is why I call ahead. And so I have lots of people that are self-diagnosed that I work with. And I will say, you know, this is my specialty. This person has significant traits of autism. We've discussed it. They understand it. You can use that terminology. We have, due to systemic barriers or whatever else, they are unable to get a formal diagnosis, but please, when you're meeting this person, treat them as such. And that has worked out really well. I don't think that would work out for me to do that, honestly. I think that I would need a friend to call over and be my social worker before I went to an emergency department to set the stage for me. I just don't have trust that they listen to our individual experiences, but I do have confidence that they listen to us as professionals.
Are there any more questions before we move over to case consultation? All right, so I'm going to pause the recording